And there you go. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Germinator. My name is Alon Eisenstein. I'll be your host for today, and I'm going to have a conversation with James Stauch. And we're going to talk about complex system. We're going to talk about creating resilient innovation with deeper problem understanding. Before introducing James and the topic of our discussion, I do want to respectfully acknowledge that I'm joining and I'm hosting this session from Kelowna, which is on the Seal ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory in a place called the Okanagan. And when I reflect on what it means to acknowledge the land and what it means to be respectful for the host nation on whose territory I'm currently living on, I always try to make it contextual to the topic of the day. And because we are talking about complex system, we're talking about gaining deeper understanding of issues. There's a lot we can learn from the SEAL culture and specifically a process called Anau Kanwi, which is a form of consensus building. And so whenever there is an issue confronting the community, and typically they are complex issues, the Inaukanwich is a structured conflict avoiding and consensus building process that is grounded on the story of creation of the seal culture, which is part of the story of the four food chief, how food was given to people, and that is inclusive of the four food chiefs, Skemchist, which is grizzly bear, Speechlum, which is bitterroot, Sia, which is Saskatoon berry, and Intiti, which is king salmon. So I encourage you all to if you're curious to learn more, to look it up online. We have some amazing scholars on our campus who have done looked into that and studied it, and they are SEAL themselves. So you can find publication that you can learn from this. And there's a lot of wisdom in these particular teaching that we can learn from. And I'm grateful to be able to do that with my colleagues and students on SEAL territory. Um, Introducing the topic of deeper problem understanding with James. So a bit of a bio, sorry, a bit of a bio about James. So James is a social innovation and system change educator. Um, he's based in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. He serves as co-chair for the Banff Systems Summit and a complex systems strategist with ATCO, ATCO's SpaceLab, and a visiting fellow at the Skoll Centre at the Saïd School, Business School at the University of Oxford. Um, and we'll probably mention that at some point because that's the place where hosting the Map the System competition, where I got the privilege of meeting James in person this last summer. James was also the founding executive director for the Institute of Community Prosperity at Mount Royal University, where he developed social innovation, leadership, system-focused, and futures-oriented learning programs for students as well as the community. And he's also been the founding executive and philanthropy consultant, including designing and managing Arctic and Northern programming with the Gordon Foundation. And most recently published a book called The 55 Minutes, an Atlas to Navigate Problems, Reveal Systems, and Ask Beautiful Questions in a radically shifting world. And for those of you who have seen the bio on the Germinator website, you would have seen that there's a link where you can download a PDF version of the book, and I encourage you to do so. I'm already using it in my own teaching. So, James, it's a pleasure to see you again, this time virtually. How are you today?
Great, Alan. Thank you for hosting this conversation. And what I'll do is I'll just make sure I can actually share. I just sent a request to you to turn slide sharing on if
Yeah, let's do
we
that.
can do that. Okay.
It's loading. Oh, there we go.
Okay, perfect. Great. So good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're what part of the country you're joining this from. Alon, thank you for the very generous introduction, and also to the Germinator podcast, to UBCO's School of Engineering for hosting this event. I'm really impressed by the engineering, the innovation ecosystem you're creating at UBCO. I seem to keep encountering it in different ways and in different forms. I know Kenneth Chow, for example. I've had some great interactions with him around aging innovation work. And so whatever if you're a student at UBCO, you've chosen well. I think it's a really exciting place to be learning this stuff from. So I'm speaking today from Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm just outside of Miramichi, New Brunswick today on a fishing camp with a workshop of Atlantic Canada business leaders. I've also put a link to the book in the chat. And also, you know what? I'm going to add to the chat. I just started a Substack, so I'm going to put the link for that in there too. So I might be referring to that later. So every problem, whether that's inside our household, inside our bodies, right up to big geopolitical or global security issues, all of these problems are produced and sustained by systems. And it's why we say things like the system is broken or the system is rigged, if you're maybe a little more conspiratorial. And we talk about disruptive innovation in programs like entrepreneurship. Well, what are we disrupting if not some kind of system? So if you wind the clock back a century, Ford's assembly line process, well, that disrupted a system of manufacturing. Nearly a century later, Amazon disrupted retail systems. Uber and Lyft disrupted systems of urban transportation. Netflix disrupted systems of motion picture distribution. Spotify, same thing around music production and distribution. And so I'm assuming that, people on this call are either current or aspiring systems disruptors of some kind. So you want to discover, apply, and scale some kind of, let's call it a solution, to a difficult problem that the world is calling out for. The irony, though, is that even though we use this word system all the time, many times in the course of the day, we really don't have a handle on what a system is. We're a highly educated people. Canadians have more post-secondary education on average than any other country on earth. So, we should be smart enough to understand and fix these broken systems, right? And now with our digital AI companions, we should be even better equipped to solve these sticky problems. But in so many important ways, this doesn't seem to be the case. So I want to back up first and tell you just a little bit about the book. Sometimes it's a bit sticky to get going on this. There we go. The title of the book takes its inspiration from Albert Einstein's aphorism that if he was given an hour to solve a difficult problem and his life depended on it, that he would take the first 55 minutes of that hour to just think about the problem and only the last 5 minutes acting to solve the problem. The truth is, he never actually said this, or there's no evidence that he said it, but whoever said it, amazing. But it was attributed to Einstein, and it's been kind of attached to him through the decades. And I actually have an upcoming Substack making the case or making the argument that, well, even though he didn't say it, it's something he probably would say, given what he believed, and trying to build a case for that. But the point is that most of us live and work in contexts where the dominant pressures, the dominant cultures invests or place value or incentivizes that last 5 minutes. That's where our organizations, our institutions, tend to act. So that includes design, strategy, invention, venture creation, regulation, litigation, or some other form of intervention or innovation. That's all the action phase, that last 5 minutes. And when you look at how we value the concept of solutions, you look at tech company names, for example. Well, the most common suffix in a tech company name, solutions. We talk about being committed to solutions, solutions oriented. But what exactly does that mean? And why are we so afraid to really understand the problem? This book is not at all about solutions, at least not directly. Instead, it's a guide to problem understanding, to using that metaphorical first 55 minutes of that hour wisely. So, what's in it? Well, it's a compendium of mapping tools and frameworks and concepts. And it's expressly aimed at people who are in innovation spaces. Now, that could be commercial innovation or technological or social or policy innovation. But innovation, of course, doesn't happen untethered or in a vacuum. You have to pre-innovate, in a sense, to look beyond the artificial horizon of the current landscape of solutions to help understand the broader context, the nature, the depth, the origins, the potential trajectories of the problem that your innovation is trying to address, and that the systems that produce and hold that problem in place. And so, just as every system is itself a part of a larger system, every problem is actually a symptom of a deeper problem. So you might be asking at this point, okay, wait a minute. I get the theoretical argument for pausing, but the fact is we are surrounded by really, really difficult problems that require urgent attention. But again, remember that the problems that you're passionate about solving are produced and sustained by systems. These are systems that human beings create. So we cannot undo these problems unless we have some level of base understanding about what a system is, how it tends to work, and how to approach it. So we've used this term atlas in the subtitle. The book, fair warning, it's 570 pages, but we do not expect you to read it cover to cover. Feel free to, but we call it an atlas cheekily. It's not really an atlas, but it's a reference. So you could start on chapter 18 if you want, and it should still make some sense. You can start at chapter 7. Unfortunately, we have a linear technology, a book that's trying to describe something that's emphatically nonlinear. And that's a limitation of the design. But hopefully with this concept of atlas, treat it as a companion, as a reference, not as a cover-to-cover read. And by the way, the book is being used in a ton of different contexts and programs and courses. So everything from art colleges to polytechnics to public policy graduate programs or MBA programs are using the book in different ways. And for those of you who are in Map the System, I don't know if there's any students on here of either, I know Jenna did Map the System, but if anyone else has done Map the System or is thinking of doing Map the System, this is, I would say, I don't think it's prideful to say this is an essential guide. This actually grew out of something we developed called the Student Guide to Mapping a System. But this is much more thorough, much better researched, and I think more clearly explained in many ways. So let's go back to this system is broken premise. Once you start to understand the problem a bit, you might start to realize that maybe the system is not actually broken because it's actually the context that has changed. And maybe the system can't be broken, and I'll explain why. So think about, for example, our international rules-based systems, right? So institutions like the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, the World Health Organization, the International Criminal Court, and so on. these more or less worked reasonably well, at least for the global north, peaceful, prosperous middle powers like Canada, for most of the last 8 decades, the 8 decades that followed World War II. But the context has shifted, as Mark Carney pointed out in his Davos speech, and it's unlikely to shift back. It's nonlinear. Um, and and it's possible that the system can't actually be broken because this would suggest that it's fixable. Um, the current moment is pregnant. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's pregnant with a new system waiting to be born. We just don't know what that is yet. The philosopher of science, Karl Popper, um, who had some brilliant, brilliant turns of phrases, brilliant speeches through the 50s, 60s, into the 70s. He spoke about the difference between what he called clock problems, which are mechanical, technical, deterministic, replicable, fixable problems. So those of you in engineering, you know what I'm talking about. These are clock problems. There's also what Popper called cloud problems. These are complex, non-deterministic, context dependent. So you can fix a clock, or somebody who knows how to fix a clock can fix a clock, but you can't fix a cloud. And can a cloud even be broken? So in the book, we urge people to get away from the language of expectation of solving, because solving is kind of a synonym for fixing. And when you actually start to examine every social problem, so problems involving human beings, you start to realize they're all cloud problems. This is obvious when you think of problems implicating the biosphere, for example, biodiversity loss or climate change. It's obvious around big, hairy social issues like crime or uh, houselessness, homelessness. But it's also social issues include anything to do with finance, trade, economics. All of those are social systems. So sometimes we falsely kind of say, well, there's economic systems over here and social systems over here. They're all social systems. Um, it's worth spending just a little bit of time talking about ATCO. And ATCO is a bit of a shifting entity right now. ATCO Ventures is a new brand and a new sort of sub entity under ATCO. ATCO is probably familiar to most people on the call. It's known across Western Canada for its temporary or modular structures. It's the third largest modular housing provider in the world. It's known elsewhere for renewables or energy transmission. Um, and interestingly, ATCO is a publicly traded company, but it's also a family-run business, so it's family-controlled, and that means something really important. It means that the company is quite interested in legacy, in longevity. You could call it sustainability in a different way, but it's not just like environmental sustainability. It's what do we have to do now to make sure that the company, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, is still around and creating value for people? And chances are it's not going to be doing what it's doing today. And so companies like that need to invest in a different form of innovation than many other companies who are simply motivated by shareholder value. And so that different form of innovation seeks to build in systemic or systems aware capacities. So think about building anti-fragility or requisite variety or futures capabilities or adaptive capacity, systems awareness, context awareness. All these things are really important to ATCO. And there's a fringe benefit as well, and that is if you are interested in this kind of innovation, you tend to actually attract even better talent. So even better student talent included, right? So it's one of the reasons that ATCO is a sponsor of the University of Oxford's Map the System competition, as well as another competition under the banner of Innovation North that's run by Western University, the Ivy School of Business. Both heavily engage and implicate systems, and they're both in a way quite different than your normal kind of pitch competition or business case competition or hackathon or design sprint. So if you haven't checked them out, check them out. So George Constantinescu, who has recently retired mere weeks ago, but he was really the person who got the systems ball rolling at ATCO as vice president of transformation. And so I include this quote here because I think it's just worth reading. In a world that urges us to move quickly, these tools are designed to help us think more deeply without sacrificing speed. They counter the most common excuse for shallow thinking, that there simply isn't time. With systems thinking, there is, because the cost of not thinking deeply is time lost to false starts, poor decisions, and unintended consequences. So in my Substack coming up either tomorrow or Thursday, I'll be posting an article that actually riffs on Norway's middle prowess on the one hand, and the history of the ozone layer and international agreements to deal with the ozone layer. I'm talking about those two stories in the context of exactly this, that if you don't apply systemic thinking, you get unintended consequences that are negative. Even if you do apply systemic thinking, then you're more likely to get intended consequences, but more importantly, even your unintended consequences are more likely to be positive.
Okay, James,
Yeah,
can I interrupt you for asking you a question on that?
absolutely. Yeah.
So so I think for myself as a system thinking educator, I mean this makes perfect sense. And maybe for some or most of the people on this call, this might be, make sense as well. Um, but as you mentioned before, right, the world is predicated on outcome oriented decision making. What is the outcome? What is the solution? How fast can we get it? Um,
Yeah.
and so I'm curious, since you've been in this space, right? You've been working in philanthropy, you've done community work, you're in academia, you're, ATCO as a private sector industry partner. Um, so you've been, saying this out loud probably for quite a long time. Um,
Mhm,
what
mhm.
what kind of pushbacks have you seen from people, whether in industry or community or government, or just the average Joe on the street? What kind of pushback do you get to this idea that let's slow down, let's think about the system before we rush into false starts?
Well, the number one thing is well, doesn't this lead us down a path of analysis paralysis? Um, you because honestly, you can never come to a complete objective understanding of anything, let alone a complex system. So it is true that there would be diminishing returns with each incremental unit of time that you would spend analyzing a problem in theory, all else being equal, right?
Mhm.
Um, and but here's the important thing. It depends on who you are, what you're studying, and where your position is in your life and work. So, for example, if you're in a social science program where you actually do a lot of this analysis, you look at issues from a highly critical lens, perhaps multiple lenses. You still don't probably look from multiple disciplines too much. So, for example, you might look at a sociological lens or an economic lens or political lens, but you might be missing some of those other pieces. Um, you are more likely to have a deeper understanding of the problem than, say, somebody who's going through an entrepreneurship program, doing an MBA, joining a bunch of pitch competitions, really, really in love with their particular idea or their solution, And maybe those people tend to push back for a different reason, which is, um, why do I have to spend time doing this? Isn't the advice persevere, don't listen to the haters, just stick to your guns. Um, you be audacious. Like the idea might be crazy, but just run with it.
Hmm.
And if people tell you, but you haven't thought of this, and you haven't thought of this, and you haven't thought of this, don't let that trip you up. Well, that's in a way that's good advice, but in another way that's reckless advice. Um, because audaciousness without thoughtfulness is just recklessness, right? That's Donald Trump.
Hmm.
Um, but and similarly, grit without the humility, the intellectual humility to step back, cultivate a beginner's mindset, and go, okay, have I really asked all the questions that I should be asking? Even some basic questions about the thing I'm trying to solve. And can I even talk about what it is I'm trying to solve with my idea or my invention or my policy solution or whatever? And so that's where I get the most pushback is people say, well, I just don't want to be drowning in a sea of analysis paralysis. Um, but but when you dive into the 55 minutes, we actually acknowledge that that can be a trap for some people. And we have a whole chapter devoted to what's different about research for systems with a kind of pragmatic, real life application goal in mind. This isn't just about writing a book about a problem. This is making the assumption that everyone reading this is actually not just wanting to learn about a problem, but actually eager to do something about it. Um, so that's the number one piece of pushback we get for this. The other one is more of an esoteric one, which is um, uh, uh, when you get into the tool section of the book, which is the latter two-thirds, um, those tools are drawn from variously organizational behavior, military planning, sociology, anthropology, urban planning, all kinds of fields. Um, and and it's a bit of a hodgepodge. And so some of the critique is, well, like there are different bodies of research for each of these models, each of these concepts. Some are super robust and well tested. Others are a little more back of the napkin. Um, and we're kind of giving them all daylight. We're all giving them a kind of presumed sense of equal time and effort. And we are not setting out with this book to create something that is, um, we want something that's academically rigorous enough that we're employing tools that actually do have some scholarship behind them. Often, most of them are actually created by scholars of one sort or another. But our goal is not to create an academic work around systems thinking, emphatically not. It is to create a practical tool. So that some of those more sort of scholarly critiques, I take, but I take them as scholarly critiques. I don't think it diminishes the usefulness of the book to the
Hmm.
general public.
Yeah, this kind of makes me think out loud that, even the language we use to talk about the world of science, right? The word scientist is a relatively new modern word, right? It used to be natural philosopher that then became a scientist, and now we have applied science. So there's like this trajectory of siphoning off responsibility that we're not being philosophizing our way, but we're trying to be applied. But maybe we kind of went too far to the let's not think about it. Let's just apply tools with high precision and narrow bandwidth of looking at beyond the scope of our own immediate vicinity.
Yeah, and we're saying it, we're just finding fancy and elaborate and metaphorical ways of saying it, but we're basically saying like don't start with it's not idea to implementation.
Hmm.
It's there's a whole process before the idea. And it's
Yeah.
also complexified. It's not just a linear process. So like the book is written in a way that you're tempted to think, and this is the other critique actually, is people go, well, so you're telling me I have to do all this work and then and spend tons of time doing this and then I'm ready to innovate? No, that's not what we're saying. That's how it appears, but in fact, we encourage in multiple places throughout the book a constant kind of interplay and dialogue between learning about the issue, framing the problem, and then learning more about it, and then reframing the problem. And part of framing and reframing, especially if it's a really contemporary issue, is that you actually end up trying stuff out. You have to do small tests, small pilots, small prototypes. And so you do ideate and you do prototype even before you're done understanding the problem. And that's okay. And that's actually, it makes a lot of sense. But again, it depends on the context. If you're doing something that is technological with relatively benign human interface implications, you can go pretty far in prototyping stuff. If you're, say, developing a program to, I don't know, reduce recidivism or lower rates of skin cancer, well, then obviously um, humans are implicated right away. You need to be super careful how you test these ideas out. You need to be really precise about the nature of the problem. And so there's a different burden depending on what kind of innovation you're pursuing. Um, but I think any type of innovation needs to be able to address. And I say to people, like a lot of people go, well, how do I know when I'm ready to innovate? Like, how do I know when I'm ready to just like when I know the problem well enough? And there's no real answer to that. The best answer I can come up with is in the book, that latter two-thirds, there's 11 chapters, and they're structured around, well, actually, I'll run ahead and show you this. They're structured around each increment of an analog clock. Sort of being cute about it, but it's a way to group
Hmm.
different kinds of questions. And so we actually say, like, if you can answer these questions reasonably cogently, then actually you're in great shape. So for example, I'll back up under frame. If you can say, well, okay, do I have a sense of the boundaries of what this problem is so that I can kind of come up with a manageable frame around the nature of the problem so that I'm not trying to solve every problem that's attached to it. That's one question. If you're reasonably comfortable with that, right? And we have tools to help you address that. We have other tools to say, okay, um, who's already trying to address the same problem or some aspect of it, perhaps in a different context? Who's out there on the landscape? If you don't know, you're not ready to innovate. It's surprising how frequent this is, that people just don't know who's out there. They don't know that there's 10 or 15 or 30 organizations with the same app or virtually the same app that they came up with, for example. You know that um, there's now over 12,000 health related apps in the app universe. Um, Probably about half of them or more are mental health apps. Do any of them work? Maybe some of them some of them must be better than others. But why are there so many? Like, why are they propagating so much? Clearly, one of the reasons they're propagating so much is people aren't aware enough of the landscape.
Hmm.
Um, roots, what's beneath the surface? What deeper problem is this a symptom of? How did this even become a problem? What happens if we do nothing about it? What does the future look like? Um, how is the system experienced by those within it? This isn't just sort of go to market or prototype testing UX. This is really early on. Like, how are people experiencing the system and informing your understanding of the problem, not just evaluating your prototype? Um, who's who in the zoo? Like, who's out there? Who's important? And how are they connected? What kind of interactions do they have? How are they networked? And then the nuance of this is, how does power flow
Mhm.
between stakeholders, between different people in the system? Who's incentivized to do what? And by the way, a system doesn't change principally because somebody doesn't want it to change. Systems don't change because they benefit people based on the status quo. So I'll give you an example. Interprovincial trade. Everyone says we need to remove interprovincial trade barriers. And everyone, like, and it just appears like, oh, well, that's common sense. And everyone seems to agree. And the premiers and the prime minister have these news conference, and everyone says, yes, let's get rid of provincial trade barriers. And then you start digging into it and you realize, well, it's more complicated. There are industries who benefit concretely and materially from having these barriers in place. And sometimes there are decent and defensible public policy reasons for having these barriers in place. So it becomes like the solution of let's have provincial free trade becomes kind of untethered and sexy, but it doesn't change that quickly because people have an incentive to keep it the way it is, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, same as the tariffs, right? It's the existence of tariffs that generated auto industry in Canada to
Yep.
allow them to manufacture and sell in Canada, and then they disappeared. And so now, again, that evolved into an integrated auto manufacturing system that crosses the border multiple times per line.
It's true.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's totally true. Yeah. And I mean, tariffs are, you could say, well, tariffs are um, preventing global free trade and the globalization of material wealth, et cetera, or whatever argument you want to create. But it is also true that the US is making money from
yeah,
charging tariffs. Like
yeah,
it's not like Donald Trump can say, "Oh, we tried that and we thought it would make a ton of money." It is making a ton of money.
yeah,
But it's just there's longer term effects that probably will, the other shoes will drop over time.
yeah,
But for now, he kind of gets a bump because like the economy hasn't tanked. It might tank now because of the war, who knows? But it's yeah, again, these things are complex. Um, Causality is the other chapter. We spend a lot of time on this, and it's the logic of the system. What contributes to what for what to happen? Like it's kind of dissecting um, um, and looking in detail at the flows within the system. Um, and those flows, of course, tend to be more circular in human systems than they are linear. Narrative is an interesting one. I mean, this is all about like even when we have data, even when we have uh, information that is as objective as we can find, we still find that systems struggle to change because systems are embedded in a kind of invisible fabric or scaffold that's constructed by narrative. And narrative is kind of everything. It's the stories that hold our world together and sometimes tear it apart. But narrative is deeply, deeply held. And it comes from culture, it comes from religion, it comes from ideology. It's the stories that are so deeply embedded that it's sometimes hard to sort of step outside that and see them for what they are, because it's unimaginable that there would be a different narrative. So we think of paradigms in science, for example. Those are really narrative structures that keep certain forms of science or scientific inquiry either bounded or limited in some way. And so the heliocentric the notion that the sun, not the earth, is the center of our planetary system, um, was something that, in the wrong century, you would be killed. Galileo wasn't killed. There was enough enlightenment, barely, to keep him alive and under house arrest and so on. But I mean, over time, we have a new paradigm, and now it would be silly to think that things revolved around the Earth. Um, I mean, a great example of this is when you look at how similar human beings' physiology is to other animals, especially other um, great apes. Um, it's pretty undeniable that we're somehow related to other animals, and that we ourselves are in fact an animal. But for most of at least the last few thousand years of human history, many, I don't know most, but many cultures and many sort of mainstream faith traditions found this to be abominable. This notion, or wouldn't even. I mean, you wouldn't even recognize it. You wouldn't even think about it. You wouldn't even. You could see, um, a cadaver on a table of a bonobo, and its organ structure and bone structure and so on is uncannily similar to humans, and still not recognize that we're somehow related. That's because of narrative, right? Um, leverage leverage kind of gets into, it's kind of the leaping point to action, which is, okay, where in this system can we actually make some changes that could actually ripple through the system? And we have a whole set of tools for that too. So sorry, I skipped ahead, but it made sense
Yeah.
given where the conversation was heading.
And I do have I do have a kind of question that kind of hinges on this idea of leveraging to action and kind of tying back to what you said before about teams or projects or people that are kind of stuck between, am I being too slow because I'm overthinking and analysis paralysis, or at the same time, as you mentioned, you can see that they haven't, if they can't answer, even the entry level prompts of any of these, 11 pointers, then they probably are not ready, and because they don't know enough about the system to actually make any meaningful change. In the preamble that you gave me, kind of shared with me for today's conversation, you had this the metaphor. I guess I used the germinator as a metaphor for the time and place to germinate. That the time and place that we don't see action above the surface, but something is happening, and something or someone is dormant, but is in tune with the conditions and is ready to react, right? So this idea of, we call it, entrepreneurship. We talk about incubating companies and startups. We talk about accelerating, right? But we don't talk germination. We don't talk about the invisible time that we don't see people take action, but their head is spinning all the time. They observe, they analyze, they think, and maybe not as systematically as your book does so well. Um, and so in your metaphor, you kind of mentioned this idea of doing deep work as opposed to surface, and not depleting the soil, right? Like not actually going deep enough with the roots and not just depleting the soil. So I wonder if you have any examples of seeing kind of, because you've done so much work yourself, where people came in with good intentions, but they only ended up weakening the system and kind of depleting the soil instead of getting to what they were trying to do.
Yeah. Um, and by the way, your metaphor of germinating is awesome. Like, I actually think, like, human beings interface with the garden. Gardens are Gardening is really tough to do. It's easy to do some things in gardening some of the time, but really good gardeners, it's amazing. It takes a lifetime to learn the kind of nuanced wisdom of how you deal with this fungal infection or this particular pest, or get your soil acidity right because of this, or how much light and what time of day that certain plants need, and how does it all work together, and it's immensely complex, and all you can do to, in a sense, optimize the system is be a gardener, right? Like so, and that's kind of true for anything. It's um, and we my co-author Daniela Pappy Thornton coined this phrase. She had an article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review called "The Rise of Heropreneurship." This notion of a heropreneur is kind of the,
Mm.
we know that's the Silicon Valley archetype, right? Like the unicorn
The white
embodied in
savior.
an individual. Yeah, exactly. And actually, and her experience included these kind of overseas aid and development experiences. She worked in what is now described as the voluntourism sector,
Hmm.
and is very critical of it too, having worked in there. But she's like, I was the white savior. Like I was the person who was like, I'm gonna go work in another country that I have no context about. I've never visited it, and somehow everyone just kind of closes their eyes and believes that I'm going to help fix education, or I'm going to fix the water security issue or food security or something. Even though I have no context, I don't have any traditional knowledge. I can't speak the language, like on and on. And we do this. We still do this all the time. Um, and but we do it in many different contexts. So, look at in the commercial space. When Uber, for example, rolled out um, its model, totally disruptive model, absolutely disrupted this, really stale and often in its own way quite predatory model of taxi um, transportation. Um, and that's an industry that deserved disrupting, absolutely deserved disrupting for all kinds of reasons. Um, but Uber didn't understand the the context of working in a system where cab companies had an immense political power, um, where municipalities had legitimate concerns around public safety, for example, um, around employment standards and so on. Um, and so I think they assumed they could do what they could do without having to do all of the deep work of understanding municipal bylaws and regulations in literally thousands of cities. And of course, they've since had to backtrack and invest in those kinds of things um, uh, and sort of figure it out after the fact.
I would even
But
say that they didn't appreciate that even though taxi companies are private, it is treated as a public service,
Mhm,
right? It's
mhm.
part of the makeup of public transportation, even though it's privately owned and privately operated.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, there's whole sections of the population that don't even use smartphones. Like they wouldn't have a clue how to call an Uber. I'm thinking my father-in-law, who's 82, smart guy, but not necessarily comfortable with technology and, looking at tiny letters on a tiny phone. And so somebody like that, they've known and worked a certain way for a long time. Well, either you ignore that demographic or you figure out a workaround or some kind of approach. But that's a case of like maybe it didn't matter to them.
Mm.
They don't have to disrupt everything, but um, I in my upcoming Substack article, I'll be talking about um, how the rollout of different generations of refrigerants were done in a way that actually solved certain problems, but created each solution creates its own problem or own set of problems down the road.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's well known that CFCs produced, they were invented in like 1928 under the DuPont brand name Freon. They solved a lot of problems. People, the earlier generations of refrigerants were highly volatile, highly dangerous, explosive, flammable, you name it. And Freon was like a miracle. It was like, oh my God, like this stuff. And it was easy to manufacture and it quickly took off. And they tested it. It's not like they didn't do some testing. They tested it for ground level, local,
Hmm.
near term effects, and it was benign. Nobody thought to test it for what it might do in the upper atmosphere um, over years and decades. And of course, by the mid 80s, that was when we discovered over the Antarctic and then eventually over the Arctic that the ozone layer was being depleted, which meant UV radiation was coming into
Yeah.
the planet. Had we not gotten on top of that, I mean, it literally could have killed all life on Earth.
Yeah.
It's the first example of a universally ratified global agreement, meaning every single country on Earth ratified that agreement. That never happens now. I mean,
Yeah.
and I shudder to think if we actually had discovered this right now, could
Would
the
we
globe
even?
get
Yeah.
together and do that?
I
Likely not.
I doubt it. I doubt it. That was a moment in time. Yeah, and I think I was reading about the book. I forgot the name of the author. I have it on my shelf. Vaclav Smil. I think he wrote about it in his book on as well. And I think that when Freon wasn't created, the technology to measure ozone in the stratosphere was not even there yet. So we could even say that, you
Yeah,
know,
right.
there's
Yeah.
a limit to how much fault we can attribute to the development of Freon because they weren't able to measure it at that point. I am mindful of the time because we're getting close to the hour. And I do want to give you an opportunity if you wanna maybe give us a again in we're down to the last 5 minutes. So we've been spending 55 minutes and
Yeah.
now we're down to the last five. And I would definitely not want to put you in the place of saying use your last five to give us an action because I think that's that's not the point. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, what would be like your takeaway, like the call to action for inaction or slower action for people who are listening to our conversation today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about taking a crucial pause. The many of the issues that are facing us seem so incredibly urgent that we just have to act now. Um, and in one sense, that's true. But because they are urgent and difficult, um, and because there's a reason they haven't been solved, quote unquote, so far, we actually can't afford not to step back and think more deeply and more laterally and more differently about each of these problems. The problem may not be the problem that you think it is on the surface. It might be actually something a little bit different or adjacent that's more important. I'll give you one quick example that comes out actually of student work in Map the System. Students were, as many students do, they're interested in why is there such a mental health challenge in among university age students, and there certainly is. I mean, yes, on the one hand, we're more aware of it, so it presents more, but there's more going on. There's definitely more going on, and it's complex. There are many contributing factors. But as they dove into all of these contributing factors, they became really interested in one of them in particular. And they ended up, it was kind of late in the day, so they kind of ran out of time, but they reframed their challenge entirely. They said, well, actually, we've stopped being interested um, in the question of why university students are experiencing mental health challenges. What we're interested in is why in middle school does our education system not recognize that this is where so many of these challenges first visibly emerge? And why are we not doing anything about it? And that was a really interesting pivot because they were looking at okay, well, students go through this journey from elementary to adulthood in high school. Um, that middle school sort of, depending on the province, roughly grade 7 to 9 or 10 age is like you're sort of still a kid and you're becoming an adult. And it's a weird time for all kinds of reasons. Your hormones are going crazy. It's such a difficult time psychologically. It's so difficult that it's actually really tough to learn other stuff. It's when you develop emotionally and physically, but intellectual development kind of happens before and after that. It
Mm,
kind of dips during that era. But we don't treat the school system with that awareness in mind, right? If we did, we would cultivate middle school teachers who had a different kind of sensibility and approach and skill set than, say, high school teachers or elementary teachers. Um, but instead, we just kind of look away and go, okay, well, it's a linear progression. Your
yeah,
education is a linear progression. And so they became super interested in this, and it gave them more energy because they were like, the big issue was way too big and hairy and intimidating.
yeah.
But this issue we can actually get our head around and start to and over time solutions start popping up or proto solutions.
And I guess the best part is it refocus your attention on a place you didn't even think of looking in the first place. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
so James, it has been an absolute pleasure. And I can't think of a better person to finish this year's worth of discussions on the Germinator. Before I let everybody go, I just want to highlight for everyone that since this is the last one for 2025, 2026, this Germinator series will go on hiatus until September, typically mid to late September. And so in the meantime, you are more than welcome to visit my website, Technology Entrepreneurship, on the UBCO server, and you can register to the mailing list. So as soon as I announce the new series and the exact dates of when guests are coming in, you will be notified in a timely manner, so you can avoid missing the first guest for the Germinator series of the 2026-2027 academic year. Um, so with that, James, it has absolutely been a pleasure. I hope I get to see you later in the summer in Oxford, and if not, in other events that are inspirational and thought-provoking. And together, I guess, between the two of us and the rest of the system thinking educators community, to keep teasing our students and the community at large to think bigger and think more non-linearly and try to tackle big problems with small steps because we're piling the big problems on a daily basis. It's a bit overwhelming even for myself.
Indeed. Alon, I can't thank you enough for just hosting this and creating the Germinator and providing the container for conversations like this. It's a real treat.
Well, enjoy the rest of your stay in the land of the Mi'kmaq.
Thank
Sorry,
you. Yeah.
Mi'kmaq,
Yeah, no, it's
and
gonna be fun.
yeah, have a good day, everyone, and stay safe until we meet again in September of 2026.